Welcome, everybody. This is my first time using Teams for webinars, so I'm hoping that you can all hear me, and I'm hoping that you can all see me, and I'm hoping that you can all see the slides that are on the screen. But thank you very much for attending and signing up to this webinar on navigating through uncertainty, learning to thrive in 2025. Where this came about is, for anybody who's been following the Purposeful Leader, is that, this back end of last year and the start of this year, it's clear that 2025 is going to be a pretty bumpy year. My sense in the way I describe 2024 is it felt like it was a year of waiting. We were waiting for the election to be called in the UK, then we were waiting for the election to happen, and then once it happened, we were waiting for the budget to come out. And then, thinking across the pond to the US, we were waiting for the US election and all the build up to that. And it feels like now a lot of those things have happened. We've got certain levels of certainty around what's happening in the world, or at least who's running the various nations. Now we're starting to live with the consequences of those people and the decisions that they're making. And as quite a few clients have said to me, it's going to be an interesting ride, or it's going to be a bumpy year, and I think we're starting to see that play out now. And so what a lot of the work that I've been doing through the Purposeful Leader in 2025 is actually helping leaders think through how they navigate uncertainty and how they start to plan for the various things that are happening and at least prepare themselves for the range of things that might impact them and their organisations. And so what I thought we'd do, and Louise van der Westhausen, who kindly supports me with a lot of what I do she's waving, a lot of what I do with the Purposeful Leader, we came to the conclusion that actually maybe running a webinar on this topic would be useful. So as we get into this, what I've done is I've pulled together the tools that I use with clients, and I'd like to say it's going to be deeply scientific and highly complex, but actually anybody who knows me knows how I work. That's not how I roll, as some would say. Instead, what I've got here is hopefully some really simple yet practical tools that any of you could take away and apply either to your own personal life or even to your own organisations, and apply quite easily and directly. And when I think about this type of concept around navigating uncertainty, scenario planning, which we'll touch on, I don't think you need to spend hours and hours and days on this concept. I think you can apply the tools really quickly and pull together plans very, very rapidly that at least help you understand what might be coming your way, and more importantly, prepare yourselves to contend with those things. So when we get into the content, you'll see that I've tried to bring it to life. And one of the challenges I felt in doing that is trying to avoid just picking one type of sector or one organisation. So when we get into the examples, I've got a bit of a mash of multiple organisations. So I'll try to explain that as we go through from some of the things that I see, which actually also seem to be common threads for a variety of clients that I work with. And what we'll do is we'll share all of the materials with you for all those people who've signed up after the session as well. So you'll get everything that we cover, and whether we support you with this process or you use it in your own right, hopefully it'll give you enough to use in anger, as they say. The final thing before I leap into the content is that we've got the chat function and Q&A as well. So if you look to the top board, please feel free to use that to ask questions. If you feel brave, put your hand up, and we're happy to take questions as we go through this. And Louise is going to kindly monitor that. And so as things come up, she'll call out, and really happy to answer anything that might come up as we get into it. So hopefully that all makes sense. Hopefully you can see the slides, and so let's dive into it. So I guess the starting place for this, a lot of the work I do with, whether through my coaching or working with teams, is that I always start with this concept of this quote about how the brain works. And one of the things that is deeply instinctive to us as human beings is this process of scanning the world to determine whether something is dangerous to us or rewarding to us, or i.e. not dangerous. And the reason I think this is so critical in these moments is that we have an inherent negativity bias to look for things that are potentially threatening to us in the environment. And that's what's kept our species alive throughout our evolution. But the problem is that because of that sensitivity to threats and that negativity bias, we tend to spot those and prepare ourselves for those more than we actually potentially could. And so when there's environments where there is high degrees of uncertainty, it's very easy for us to default to a threat response. And whilst I think that is, pardon me, useful and probably healthy in some respects, the problem is that when we're in sort of threat mode, is that we are more withdrawn, we're less curious, we're less open to opportunities that might be around us. And the reason I call this out is because when we're in environments like we're in 2025, where there just seems to be this constant flow of uncertainty, and if I sort of relate it to the US, we're getting policy decisions, sent over Truth Social, which can upend sort of global trade, is it's easy to feel like you're constantly trying to comprehend what's coming out and constantly thrown into that threat response. But for me, the more we can prepare ourselves and start to step back from that threat response and actually embrace greater levels of curiosity, the more we can be open to exploring what the opportunities are. And I think that for me, the more we can prepare ourselves, be curious, really engage in what's going on in the world, at least with some degree of curiosity, the more effective we can be. And what this process is all about, that I'm about to take you through, is trying to shift away from that sort of instinctive automatic threat response because of the uncertainty, to instead actually start to embrace curiosity and embrace more positive and proactive planning around the uncertainty that we experience. And as I said, the tools that I'm using, whether you sit down and actually apply them directly and write them down for your business or your own life, even starting to think through some of the things that I'm going to reference here, I think is a really healthy way to engage with change and uncertainty in a far more positive approach, in a far more positive way. So hopefully that makes sense so far. We seem to have a question come up. Oh, sorry, just the Q&A function, not the chat function. So if you've got a question, please use the Q&A, not the chat function. Hopefully everybody can see that. Thank you, Louise. That's my deep understanding of Microsoft Teams. So to kick us off, I really love this quote from Charles Darwin, and whilst it's a sort of classic quote that many have seen before, it's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but it's the one that is the most adaptable to change. And I think this is so relevant, because when we don't have control over the changes that are impacting us, it's our ability to adapt to them and adapt in a proactive way that will really help us. So I'm clearly in a room with a sensor light, so they've just gone off. Hopefully you can still see me. And when I think about that, the types of tools that I really focus on to help people be more adaptable to change and to the uncertainty that's coming their way is these. And this is what I'm going to frame the session around. So number one, the ability to do horizon scanning. So that's the ability to get off the dance floor and onto the balcony, as they say, to really step back and say, well, what's going on here? What are the range of things that might be coming my way that might be impacting me, my organization, my team, or whatever it might be? And that could be everything from sort of deep macro changes in the environment through to more micro things in terms of the immediate environment that operates, that goes on around me, and even within ourselves as well. And once we've done that horizon scanning and started to understand what the potential uncertainty and changes are coming our way, then we can start to define the outcome. So okay, so if these things might impact me or my organization, what do I want to achieve in the face of those? Because the clearer I can be about my outcomes based on the range of things that might impact me, the more effective I can be at planning. And clearly, as you can see in that little sort of circle, binding those two, step one and step two together, that's an iterative process. Because what I find with horizon scanning is that you start scanning, you start thinking about outcomes, and you keep scanning and you keep looking across the world, and it becomes a powerful iterative process of of looking more deeply about actually what are these trends and how will they impact me, through to then how what's the outcome I want to achieve. And I'll go into this a lot more deeply in a moment. The third step is then, so if they're the outcomes that I'm seeking to achieve, what are the range of scenarios that might be available to me to be able to achieve those outcomes? And as anybody would know from sort of classic grow model type coaching, scenario planning is getting big open thinking about what are the full range of things that we could do to deliver what our definition of success is, our outcomes. And by being really big open and creative in that space, you could try to avoid shutting anything down and start to look at all the possible range of things that we could do. And then from that, clearly it's about taking action. So from all of those scenarios, what am I actually going to do next? So hopefully that makes sense as a really basic methodology. What I'm going to do now is just step into or go into each of those steps, and I'll bring it to life in terms of that mash of sort of real world client examples I've got that will ultimately feed through to what actions the clients actually took. All right, so hopefully that makes sense so far. So let's leap into it. And please, if you've got any questions, use the Q&A function as I referenced. So horizon scanning, again, I'd like to say it's deeply complex. It's not. The biggest challenge I find with horizon scanning is carving out the time and getting the mental attention to actually employ some tools to do this process. Because often what happens is that we're moving so fast in our day-to-day lives, and yes, we know lots of stuff is going on around us, but we don't step right back and start to look at all of that stuff and start to categorize it into what the issues are and what the impact might be. And so when I think about horizon scanning, it's a bunch of really simple yet critical questions. So question one is, what are the macro, external, or micro internal changes that will impact my organization or my team or myself? And I keep saying that because actually I think these tools can be used as in the same way for you, your family, yourself as a leader, as a professional, as a human being, through to organizational level. So stepping right back at the macro level and saying, right, what are all the forces, the things that are happening in the world and all the changes, and how might they impact me in whatever context? And then what are some of the things that are far closer to home that could also impact me? And some of the time in my coaching work, I'll talk about sort of deep internal forces in terms of what's going on within the individual and getting them to be more conscious about that as well. And then from all of those various drivers of change, what are the potential impacts going to be? So I might talk about, from an organizational level. In fact, I was talking to a client, when was it? Tuesday, who's into cables, and so they provide cables. And so one of the big forces influencing them is copper prices. And clearly we're in the midst of sort of an emerging trade war, higher tariffs on metals, etc. And so that's a big factor for them that will influence the profitability of their company. And so a lot of the things that they'll do is adopt hedging strategies in terms of how they try to mitigate any major fluctuations. And so the potential impact for them is it could either inflate their margins or completely erode their margins. And so to help guide some of those questions, I love the pestle analysis. I mean, anybody who's studied an MBA or any type of business course will know this model. It's a very classic, but I think it's a really lovely way of, rather than just sort of looking at everything that's happening around you, starting to categorize it into one of these areas. So you can go, right, so what are all the big political changes that might be happening? What are all the economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal? And I think these dimensions are actually quite holistic when you start thinking about our organizations and what might impact them. And so when I work with people to do horizon scanning, we basically go through each of those, thinking more in depth about what what are the potential changes that are happening today, or what are the changes that are happening today and that might come down in the future, and what will the impacts of those be. So hopefully that makes sense so far. To bring that to life, let's call it Widget Co in terms of that, my mashed up set of clients. But some of the things that I've seen quite a bit is as drivers for change is clearly changes to product related regulation. So that's everything from new laws about safety standards, food standards, through to packaging, etc. And the point here is that regulation can have a slight impact or a deep impact on organisations. And so for quite a few of the clients that I work with, because they have dependency on regulation, actually that's really critical for them. One of my clients, or actually a couple of clients, are housing associations. And so they know that the regulator is about to change a bunch of things that will have a deep impact on their organisation. Clearly, anybody in the UK will know about increased employment costs, national insurance, national minimum wage, and so that has a potential to have an impact. We've got continued cost of living pressures, and one which is, I think, both an opportunity and a risk is this accelerated availability of technology and the advancement of that technology. And so these are quite classic ones that I'm seeing quite very common impacting organisations that leaders are thinking about, and there will be lots more for each of you in your organisations. And I guess when thinking about then the potential impact of these, some of the impacts come out, requirements for more stringent controls across the company, and that's both from a regulation perspective, from a cost perspective, from an adoption of tech. I sat with a client early last week facilitating a big conference of sort of 100 people, and one of the questions that we posed to the audience is, how are you using AI? How are you using it in your work? How are you using it personally? And the reason for that question is they realised that actually there just was no controls over the adoption and utilisation of ChatGPT as an example in the company. And then clearly there's some potential risks there in terms of the type of information that people are sharing, potential breaches of GDPR, etc. The increased costs, greater financial pressure on the company reduces capacity for innovation investment. With the budget announcement last year, it's been really fascinating for all the leaders that I've spoken to about that, the number that articulate the impact on their company of national minimum wage, national insurance in terms of FTE. Somebody said to me this week, yeah, Rob, that's going to be 15 FTE is the impact on us. And that the logical conclusion to that thinking is that for us to just stand still, we're going to have to take 15 people out of our cost base. And clearly, if we don't do that, then we're eliminating or significantly reducing the capacity for further innovation and investment. Variable demand from end consumers is another potential impact. Clearly, we're seeing this in a variety of customers that I work with, where actually because of the change in customer dynamics, increased cost, price pressure, all of that kind of stuff, they're seeing customer behaviour change, which means that they need to be far more thoughtful about their approach to product pricing, etc. And then clearly there's a increased pressure and opportunity to adopt new tech solutions. In other words, with all of these things, and we'll talk about how they fit together is in the next section. If you don't adopt some of this technology, then you're going to fall further behind the competitors and be less competitive. And so that there is both an opportunity but a pressure to do so. And it's interesting, talking to a few of my clients where they know it's coming, they know it's here, they don't quite know how to better embrace some of these changes coming through, but they know they have to, and it's needing some deep thinking to support them to do that. So hopefully that makes sense, just to set the scene in terms of, well, actually horizon scanning is about looking broad and looking close categorizing what the potential drivers of change might be, but more importantly, understanding the true impact. And the more you can put some numbers around that impact, the more effective you can be. So we know, as we talked about national minimum wage, national insurance, we know what the impact of that is going to be on an organization because we can measure that. And getting some better metrics around it means that we can then be more thoughtful about the next step, which is all about defining our desired outcomes. So with that, as I said, if you have got an understanding about the potential impacts, this next step is go, okay, so what does good look like for us there? Because whilst we can dive into scenario planning against those changes, being really clear about what good looks like for us, our desired outcome, means that we can be more considered about the types of scenarios we could play with, and more importantly, the types of actions and how we'll measure the success of those actions. And so, some of the things that you really want to consider here is, what are the desired outcomes against it? So, if I'm thinking about, the financials are a really easy place to focus here. So, okay, so from a cost-based perspective, again, dealing with another client, the first round of the budget that they did, that everybody sort of bottom-up budgeting, came in at a 20% increase in the cost base. And okay, hang on, but all of these pressures are telling us that actually we've already got massive pressure on our cost base, and the bottom-up budget is meant that that all gets blown out of the water. The desired outcome they had was that there is zero change in their cost base from 2024 to 2025, and they were really clear on that, and they put some clear parameters around it, which then forced a different type of decision. Then the other thing is, what does success look like for us in this context? So whilst it's very easy to put financial metrics on some of these things, for something like regulation, you could put, success will be, being completely compliant with the regulation in the most efficient way possible. And then again, you could put some measures around that, to the housing association that I'm working with, and they know the regulation is coming through. What they've started to do is put some definitions around what their thresholds are around each of the various regulatory changes, and making sure that the definition for success around those thresholds flows into each of their policies, processes, and how they operate to deliver it. And by doing that, they also know how much space they've got around those thresholds, because it's not necessarily always black and white, if that makes sense. And so hopefully, again, not rocket science, but the key is, if you're clear on the changes, clear on what the potential impacts would be, it's really important to then say, so what does success look like for us against those impacts? What's the minimum we're prepared to accept? Because without that, how do you know what you're shooting for? So to bring that to life, again, for Widget Co, some of the desired outcomes are these, one, efficiently delivered regulatory controls. And the reason this is important for a few of the clients is that they know from past experience is that they have ended up because they haven't thought about it as deeply, is that they've just piled on resource to manage the regulation, as opposed to saying, right, what levels of controls do we want to put in place, and how do we deliver those controls as efficiently as possible? And that forces a different level of thinking, that it's not just more resource to deal with it. It's working differently, working smarter. Quite a few of the clients that I work with, when they're thinking about variable demand from end consumers and then technologies, actually there's a blending of those two things that say, hang on, is there a way for us to increase our market share here? So rather than go purely into defensive mode, can we look at the product and the price or the services that we've got and improve their competitiveness? Rather than just, as I said, sitting purely on the laurels and going into defense mode. Actually, can we be a bit more attack on this? Can we reshape things to take market share differently? And interestingly, I was on a coaching session this morning. Oh, there's the lights back. A coaching session this morning where where the client that I was working with, a leader of a business, has done exactly that. He said, we're getting more and more pressure, and so what we're actually doing is tweaking our services, starting to diversify into other areas and taking market share from some of our not so obvious competitors. And the thing is, if this is the size of the pie that they've got in their competitive landscape, they're starting to bite into new parts of it that are slightly outside of their classic operating space. And they've done that because they know that there is increased pressure on their model, and actually, they're starting to be more creative about how they really look at the market and pursue the market. And what's fascinating, as I said, the response from the people in this space, the sort of adjacent competitors, is not positive, because they didn't see it coming. They didn't see that they were going to be able to lose market share to a small, nimble competitor. Then you've got things about maximum efficiency. So in times of financial tightness, variable demand, trying to find ways to increase capacity for investment. If you're holding your cost base as well, can we do things differently, smarter, better? And I never cease to be amazed through the reviews I do in businesses. I always joke with clients that I'm like the person who's using their watch to tell them the time, classic sort of consultant. But it never ceases to amaze me that people know where there's inefficiency in organizations, know where there's opportunity to get greater cost control, but very rarely do you stop and ask them, because everybody's moving so fast. And so in this type of environment, say, actually, can we get more juice for our squeeze, as another client would say to me, is there a way to improve our efficiency, not necessarily just by taking out headcount or anything like that, but can we work smarter, faster, better, using technology, using other solutions to help us get more bang for our buck, as some would say. And then touched on the increased competitiveness, and this relates to it, is there other places that we can play here? Can we diversify our growth? Can we go into new markets, new products? And one of the things I'm always a big fan of is, I think it's called the Ansoff matrix, which looks at, imagine a 2x2 matrix, where you've got vertical is markets, horizontal is products, and you've got existing, new, and new is looking at, actually, is there ways we could sell more of our existing products to our existing customers? Is there ways that we can sell more of our existing products to new customers or in new markets? And then bottom left is there places that we can build new products for our existing customers? And then top left is clearly, or top right, sorry, is clearly all diversification. Is there more interesting stuff that we could be doing that we're not doing at the moment? And as you can see from that, hopefully what's coming across is that just by that simple process of mapping out drivers for change, potential impacts, okay, so what are the outcomes that we really want to achieve here in the face of those impacts, that will help us drive greater performance, be more successful, and not just hold on to, but increase market share. And by defining these outcomes, and not just taking a pure defensive play around them, which is that threat response, you can start to get then more creative about the scenarios that you pursue. So hopefully that makes sense. I find these webinars always slightly odd because I can't see people's faces, and I'm a big fan of sort of trying to gauge people's reactions from what they're how they look, and sort of raising thumbs and things like that. But hopefully so far, this is making sense, and the fact that actually very quickly you can go from a place of uncertainty through to opportunity. You can go from a place of drivers of change through to getting on the front foot by being more assertive in terms of defining what outcomes that you want to achieve in the face of the potential impacts of what's coming your way. So again, if you've got any questions, got any thoughts, I appreciate these things are always slightly daunting to ask questions on, but please feel free to use the Q&A function or put up your hand. I'd love to hear from people if you're willing to speak up. So step one, drivers of change, horizon scanning. Step 2, defining the outcomes. Step 3 then is all about scenario planning. And scenario planning for me, it's really about understanding all the potential ways that you can deliver your outcomes, your desired outcomes. And again, this isn't about trying to lock down anything straight away. It's about being creative. It's about really thinking broadly about all the potential things that you could do to really achieve what you're seeking to achieve, to deliver on your desired outcomes. And so for me, this is all about, what are the full range of options available? Don't be restricted in your brainstorming. Think crazy, think creative, go beyond the obvious. I remember talking to a CEO many years ago, and during the 2008 financial crisis, his business was impacted significantly by the financial crisis, and in that moment, he decided to delist it and find ways to delist it and turn it into a private company. And I said, geez, that must have been, so you had, declining market, no one was buying his services. He knew it would come back eventually because, these things often do. And what he chose to do was to delist. And he said, the reason I did that because I knew when the market came back, that would help us accelerate and blow past the competition because we'd be less encumbered by various factors. And I never forget what he said to me. He said, Rob, sometimes when everybody is zigging, you need to zag. And it stuck with me as a way of thinking, actually, don't be restricted in your thinking here. We get to scenario planning. It's your opportunity to go well beyond. And I guess that the second thing that comes up when thinking about scenario planning is this concept of levers. And so when I think about delivering my outcome, what are all the levers that I have available to me? And the way I think about organizations is a bit like a machine. And appreciate people will sort of love this metaphor or not. But with a machine, you have a bunch of levers that are in front of you. And any of those you can move, manipulate, you can change. You can push more forward, pull more back, push some forward, etc. And when you adopt that type of mindset, you go, actually, what are all the various things that we could play with here? Or are there other levers that we should be looking at and acquiring or finding a way to utilize? Because when I have access to those levers, then I can start to think about, well, how do we play around with them to create scenarios that will help us be truly effective? And a few further thoughts around that, as I've sort of touched on already, is think big, think creative when you're doing your scenario planning, because from those scenarios, whilst you might think about something that's completely crazy and on the face of it you go, no, we'd never do that, or that's just not practical, there might be something within that scenario that you go, oh, that's a gem. Actually, how do I take that bit of that scenario, blend it with some other scenarios and create something really special? And I've seen quite a few CEOs in my career who've got the ability to do that just because they're unencumbered in that scenario planning and really keep it broad and open and see what comes up and then see how they could potentially use it. I guess as I sort of referenced around levers, is just be thinking about anything that's at your disposal, colleagues, technology, processes, marketing, customers, whatever it might be, really think broadly about the entire environment that you're operating in and anything that you can influence to deliver the outcomes that you need. And so again, think broadly, think creatively here, and take the time to really consider all of that. Because, again, you might look at this bit and this bit and this bit, but actually when you step right back and look at those levers, look at the scenarios, then you might start to connect dots that you hadn't thought about connecting before. So again, bring it back to my example of WidgetCo. If these are some of the outcomes, and I appreciate whenever I've done this with clients, we end up with big lists of scenarios and some pretty wacky creative sort of stuff that comes out of it. But some of the simple scenarios here, just to bring it to life, yeah, you can outsource. You can outsource all or some of your regulatory controls, because actually it's a simple way of doing it more efficiently. Again, the client I was talking to this morning, they provide outsourced services for a range of things. And actually what they do as part of their sort of proposition is the ability to have greater control for cheaper than you could do it for yourself. And when they position that with clients, actually it's hugely powerful. You could go and procure some other form of service to help you. Clearly that has a cost impact, but actually there's ways of doing that might actually help you be even more efficient. One of the clients that I've worked with who was facing the barrel of some really tough market conditions, stepped right back and challenged everything, especially in terms of the nature of the product and the packaging. And they sought to, and they recognised that they were rapidly becoming commoditized and very non-differentiated. They were sort of trading off brand and brand reputation, and that was starting to become eroded. And so they went out and deliberately looked at opportunities to modify what they were offering, and then to find ways to really differentiate themselves. And they started with really crazy ideas and sort of dialed that back to something that they knew would actually work, and ultimately did for them. And interestingly, the way they did that, because they had some sort of regulation around packaging that they knew was coming down. They got in front of that regulation, and they were able to satisfy not only becoming more competitive, but also the regulatory requirements around it. So they really truly differentiated themselves in the market. Then one of the things I find really interesting is that where organisations have been running for quite a while, that they haven't stopped and really thought about their value proposition and thought about what they're offering and the value that has in the market. And it was really fascinating. Actually, I was talking to a new client that I'm just about to start working with, and I was saying to him, I think there's something special about what you offer. I just can't put my finger on what the value proposition is, how I would sell it to your clients. And I started just throwing words out, because they sort of agreed with me and said, yeah, well, it's kind of this and kind of that. And I said, well, is it this? Is it that? And I was being deliberately provocative, as I often am. And actually, at one moment, they said, no, Rob, it's not that. It's this. Awesome, great. Actually, I love that. That feels really powerful. And they hadn't actually conceptualized it for themselves. I hadn't thought about the true value of the product they've got. So there's something about even just simply stepping back and thinking about, actually, have we got the value proposition right here? Are we articulating it correctly and selling it on the basis of that? Some other things that are a lot more straightforward that I'm seeing more clients do. Clearly, if you've got competitive pressure, you've got a desire for greater controls and cost efficiency, going through and just good, solid redesign of processes. So again, the housing association that I was working with this week, they recognise that they're just not as efficient as they need to be, and they've got increasing cost pressures, as everybody does, and so they're taking a really robust review of all of their core processes and looking at how they can better automate that, and then ultimately set the foundations for utilisation of developing their own large language models and adoption of AI. And that's stuff that they just never would have really got to if they hadn't had the pressure to do it. And whilst that again is a defensive play in some respects, it's also sort of an offensive and opportunistic play, because it will help them be more competitive. And then you've got ways to actually just get colleagues working differently, focused on some of these to deliver cost drivers, to look at new products, etc. And for me, I think one of the untapped opportunities in organisations is the capability and the perspective of colleagues. It never ceases to amaze me, and there should be a few more arrows in there connecting colleagues to other things. But like I said, the number of times I've gone into organisations, conducted a sort of business growth review for them, and come back and told them all the things that people have told me, and and you sort of look in their face again, yeah, we should have probably thought of that, because actually the colleagues know what to do to improve efficiency most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time, and rarely do you tap into them. And I think I've got one more. And one of the other things that that I've seen a few clients do is actually take really considered action, build some scenarios around using talent to develop new business lines. And this is where you get the opportunity to bring talent and strategy together. And it becomes hugely powerful of actually utilizing those people, incubating them to actually look at new business lines that they can run. And so, whilst you can see that there's an interplay of all of these scenarios across the various outcomes, the idea behind this is actually let's step right back and say, to deliver the outcomes that we need to make us more competitive, to help us really thrive in the face of the big changes, what are the full range of things that we could do? And as you can see from those scenarios, whilst I haven't got any extreme, crazy, creative ideas there, actually some of this is just good bread and butter running the business well. And for me, some of these ideas come up as fleeting moments. Management or leaders feel like they're compelled to sort of solve all the problems themselves. But there are some really simple things that you can do from a scenario basis to go, right, and this is the action we need to take. Let's take a bit of that and a bit of that and a bit of that, and this is how we'll move things forward. So again, understand the changes or the drivers of change, understand the impact of those drivers of change, the impact of them, and then in the face of those impacts, define what success means to you, define the desired outcomes that you want, and then what are the full range of things that we could do to really solve for those desired outcomes, to deliver those desired outcomes. And because once you've got that full range of things, you can step right back and say, well, which are the things that we think we could really play with here, even if it's components of them that we can then turn into actions that we can then track through. So again, hopefully all of that makes sense. And as I said at the start, it's not a deeply scientific methodology, but actually just by mapping through these stages, I never cease to be amazed at what comes up and what the opportunities are, and just giving yourself a bit of space and time to think more creatively based on the desired outcomes, etc., is a wonderful way of just starting to step back and think about how you're going to do things differently from the tried and tested methods that you've got today. So the final step in this is all about taking action. Was that somebody put in there in the chat? When everybody is zigging, we zag. I love it. Thank you. It was one of those statements that always stuck with me, and I share with leaders because it's a great way to break yourself out of your thinking. Often when the threats come in, or the sense of threat is increased, when the level of change and uncertainty is causing us to feel uneasy, it's so easy just to withdraw. It's so easy to let that threat response take over. And when we're in that state, we're less effective, we're less creative, we're less curious, we're less open to try new things. And that whole zig when everybody else is zagging, or zag when everybody else is zigging, I love, because it just forces me to think, actually, is there a different approach here? Is there something else we could be doing, I should be doing, that everybody else isn't? Because that's where the real opportunity is. But clearly that takes courage and confidence. But that courage and confidence comes from that process of mapping back all the way through to the drivers of change. So the final step around taking actions is that, from the scenarios, there's a few things. One, looking at those scenarios and just asking, well, which of the scenarios or components of the scenarios have the greatest probability of delivering the desired outcomes? And the point around here is that, rather than just take a pure sort of mechanistic way of thinking and saying, I need to do that or that, I could do a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of that. And again, it's about being creative and saying, actually, what are all the things that I could potentially do here? And what's the right mix of those that will help me be effective? And then the second from that, go, okay, So what are we going to do about it? What's the action we're going to put in place? Because I think the risk here is with all this planning is that you go, right, we've done it all, we understand, we've got some scenarios, and then we do nothing with it. And well, that was just a bit pointless. So driving through to action is really important. And as I've said a few times, don't be afraid to mix and match, because I think that the power of scenario planning is that all of a sudden you've created this full range of options that you might not choose all of them at once or every part of every one at once or even half them, but you've created this range of options. So if things change and move over the course of the year, then you could always go back to those scenarios, refresh them in the face of what the changes are, and take different choices. And the thing about being not being afraid to mix and match is that you can then be creative about what action you might take. And so to bring that to life, across it, one particular client, what they did is that they actually did go out and procure a new information platform, but actually what they did is, whilst that created cost for them, what they procured ended up helping them quite dramatically improve the efficiency of the team. And so rather than just going out and outsourcing completely, what they did is they found ways to retain the capability, but to make it far more efficient and far more operationally effective as well. Another client, as we talked about, process improvement, again, quite straightforward. But what they did is they launched a full phase review of all of their processes. Interestingly, they went out and used external support because actually they recognized that they had real blind spots about potential opportunities, and through that identified efficiencies and really sought to utilize better tech solutions, especially in terms of automation, and then actually they're starting to build the platform for greater use of large language and AI, especially in their sort of customer operations, because they know they've got so much data and very consistent ways of doing things, and yet each time something comes in, they go through the same process again, which is just completely inefficient. Whereas you can get automation to do a lot of that for you. The other thing a couple of clients did, which I've already referenced, is just go back and say, hang on, let's not be so protective of all of our products and our services, but let's look at each one in its own right and do a really robust review, looking at, is there ways to use customer insight to make us more competitive. And what was interesting, especially for one of the clients, is that was really uncomfortable for them, because some of their assumptions around their particular products were so deeply ingrained in the company, and they were sort of seen as sacred cows, pardon the expression. And so they had to let go of a lot of that, say, actually, we believe this is special. We believe what we've got is really special, but it's becoming commoditized. So let's just acknowledge the fact that it's not as special as we thought it was, but let's find ways to actually make it more special. And that was really quite impressive, how they then started to change the nature of the products and then the pricing and the proposition that sat around it. And another client, which I referenced around talent, their issue was that their growth was stagnating. I couldn't quite work out why. Yes, there were changes going on in the macro environment, but they didn't seem to be too challenging in terms of creating detrimental impact. But actually the real challenge for them was internal challenges, where there was a growing level of complacency and frustration in their workforce. And as I went in to do the growth review, it turned out their team had a bunch of great ideas about, I just asked them a simple question: how would you grow this business? How would you grow this business? Simple. And the number of things that came out were amazing. And what we did is we looked at who the talent were, mobilized those talent, gave them opportunities to run projects, to create new business lines that turned into their own P&Ls, and did that in a phased way so it didn't overload the business. And it's truly amazing about how much growth they've realized out of that, all of ideas that were sitting in their own heads. And so the point here is that your scenarios, think creatively, think big, and then start to come down and say, well, what are we going to do about it? Because all those big macro changes that are happening, and even more micro changes closer to home, yes, once we understand the impact we desire, define our desired outcome, we can then start to be more creative about how we fulfill them. So I'm conscious there's a lot of information there, and I'm conscious that that's me talking at you quite a bit. But hopefully, what you can see is that the methodology is really straightforward. The foundations of the methodology, from horizon scanning to defining your outcomes to scenario planning and taking action, is all about saying, yes, the world is uncertain. Yes, there's a lot of things that's happening out there that could have a impact, either detrimental or even positive impact on our organizations, on ourselves. But we don't necessarily need to go into pure threat mode in terms of our response to that. Instead, actually, by understanding those changes, by understanding the drivers, we can adopt a simple methodology to get ourselves into a far more flexible, curious, opportunistic space. That means that we can actually redefine how we operate to make us more successful and competitive, etc. And so, hopefully, that's been useful. As I said, it's always a bit daunting when you can't see people's reactions and what people are thinking. But I'd love to just in the last few minutes open it up to questions. And so if you've got any thoughts, questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. Put them in the Q&A box, or put your hand up and answer, and I'd be happy to answer them or give responses to them. If you want any more support, want to follow more about who we are, what we do, please go take a look at the Purposeful Leader on LinkedIn. Check out our insights, or feel free to drop me a note. I'm really happy to pick up conversations. If we find that this has been successful, then Louise and I will look at some upcoming masterclasses on different subjects. We'll think about thriving through change, or imposter syndrome, and helping people at a couple of topics. But thank you very much for your time, everybody. If you do have any questions, comments, please feel free to drop me a note, a Louise a note. Really happy to engage in conversations around it. And I hope that's been a useful use of an hour. And thank you very much for your time.